This is week 4 in Sociology of Marriage and Family, and this week we're going to be looking at theoretical approaches to the family and some different ways in which family relationships are explained. To begin with, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about what theory is supposed to do and how we think about theory and explain different theories that we use. Many students in class don't really like theory, and they tend to think that the theory sections of the courses are boring or hard to understand. But I would argue that actually I love theory. I'm kind of a theory geek, and I would argue that we do theory all the time. Anytime we try to explain what's going on, either with us or in the world, we're thinking, that's my dog, sorry. We're thinking theoretically. So if you're trying to understand why your family does X, Y, or Z, why my dad acts this way, why my mom acts this way, and maybe it's because they're stressed at work, then that's a theoretical explanation that economics and work life influences family and family relationships. That's you're doing theory if we think about that. So I think we do theory far more often. We just don't necessarily do it in a systematic way, and that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at some folks who have systematically tried to explain the way the world works, and in doing so can tell us something about the family and family relationships. Theories differ by level of explanation, and the level of explanation is basically if we were to build layers of the types of behavior that theories try to explain, we could kind of rank order them. And at the bottom would be, not in terms of value, but just in terms of our layers, would be micro theories. And those types of theories try to explain specific interactions between individuals. So a micro theory of the family might look at the use of nonverbal communication in the family. What does a sigh mean in this family? What's being communicated by a look? Or how do families make meaning of things that happen to them? That's a micro level explanation, explains the behavior of individuals and small groups. Macro level explanations or macro theory explains broad social phenomenon, what's happening societally in terms of the family. And this is kind of where we take our own experience and we ramp it up, and we talk about how family structures happen in a society, or what's the given family norms, or socially accepted family norms, and that's at a macro level. That's not what my family does or what my family thinks is normal. It would be societally, how does society treat this institution, or what are the prevailing ideas and the common functions of families across the U.S., cross-culturally, and various, again, at a higher level. Multi-level theories would incorporate both levels of explanation. I don't talk about multi-level theories in this section in my lectures, and I don't hit too much. We talk more about micro level explanations later on in the course when we talk about mate selection, and theories of love and interaction, those types of things. Right now, we're going to focus on macro level explanations. And there are two macro theories that we're going to explore. The first is structural functionalism. The second is conflict theory. Conflict theory is associated with the work of Karl Marx. We'll talk about that in the next lecture. This lecture focuses on structural functionalism. Structural functionalism is a school of thought that originates with Talcott Parsons. He's not writing simply about the family. Talcott Parsons, when I went to read, and I'm forgetting the title of the book that this comes from, but that was the first book I read when I was in grad school, was this book where he outlines his theory of structural functionalism. And I remember thinking, this man is like God. He's looking down on all of society and trying to see how everything fits together and how everything works. And he's not just talking about the family, he's talking about religious organizations, he's talking about government, he's talking about work and work life, all of these things, and he's like puzzle pieces, and he's all trying to make sense and make it work together. And I really got a sense of, wow, this is a grand theory, and that's a lot of times what macro theories are called, grand theories of human behavior and social behavior. And this is really what he is setting out to do, to explain how society functions. How everything in society functions. He's writing in the 50s, later on the 60s. In the 50s and 60s, social scientists in the U.S., for the most part, didn't use a lot of Marxist work, solely because we were in the middle of the Cold War, and the attitudes and ideologies of the day didn't allow it. I mean, it wasn't really something that had any traction or popularity at all. And in fact, this is kind of a writing in response to some Marxist work, because at that point, the conflict theories, which Marx didn't call them conflict theories, but Marx's work was one of the few attempts to really explain these broad level occurrences, social occurrences. And so Talcott Parsons is writing to create, again, a grand theory in response to Marxist work. In order to inform his theory, he used the work of Max Weber and Emil Durkheim. If you've had a sociology theory class, you know that Weber, Durkheim, and Marx are kind of the three theorists that most social theories have grown out of. There are some modern theories that we associate with different people, but these three are kind of the backbone of social theory. He pulled from Durkheim, Parsons pulled from Durkheim, the idea that society functions around norms of behavior, that we all learn how to act in particular ways, that there are rules that we abide by in order to function in society. And these rules are called norms. Now, if you think about what a norm is, probably most of you have come across this idea before. If you break a norm, you receive some kind of sanction for that norm, and it's more often than not, almost exclusively, an informal sanction, meaning you get a side glance, or somebody gossips about you. But I used to have a breaking norm experiment in one of my classes a long time ago. And I asked them to break a social norm and then write a report on it. And one of my favorites was a man who told his girlfriend that he was her best friend's baby's dad. So he had slept with her best friend and was the father of her best friend's baby. And if you think about that as a norm breaking, how many social norms were broken with that? Well, first of all, we could say friendship norms were broken between her and her friend. Rules and expectations of dating and monogamy were broken. All sorts of social norms were broken in that experiment. Now, he tried to tell her it was the assignment for the course, and that he really hadn't slept with her best friend. But I always wondered if he had used the experiment as an excuse to kind of float the idea and see how she would react. But that's you know when you've broken a social norm. Maybe you're not wearing the right thing, or you didn't say the right thing in the right circumstance. Parenting is the process of socializing children, and socialization is the process by which we acquire our ideas of behavior and social norms. So basically, this idea is originated with Durkheim, that we all conform to social norms. He argues that social institutions help us learn those social norms. So when we go to church, we learn norms of behavior at church. When we go to school, we learn norms of behavior at school. In our families, we learn norms of behavior. And that all of that helps integrate us in a particular community, or as a community. Those are the places that we learn common shared values, ideas, rules for how we act, and that in turn makes us group members and gives us some form of group identity. If you've joined a sorority and a fraternity, you've probably experienced this, the acquisition of new norms of behavior, and then once you have acquired those new behaviors, acting in that particular way sets you apart from other people. You are now a member of that group. That's really what he's trying to talk about, that social norms integrate us and give us a group identity, or a communal identity, a neighborhood identity, a city identity, a university identity. Wearing orange would be an example of that at SAM. He argues that when social institutions fail, social cohesion is compromised. Now, by social institutions, I'll back up. Again, I mean those institutions within society that support all of the functions and all of the people within a society. So family would be a social institution. Government, the education system, the economic system, religious institutions. All of these things would be those social institutions that, again, kind of keep everybody in check, keep our communities in check, keep our individual behavior in check. When one of those systems fails, the ability of a society to kind of keep everyone in check becomes compromised, and we hit bumps in the road. Let me go back a second, and I'll show you. If these social institutions are woven together as a piece of burlap or maybe a sweater, and one of those social institutions experiences some stress, and maybe a thread is pulled in our piece of burlap, all of the other social institutions are pulled as well, and it risks the function of the whole system. So I'll give you an example. When the economy is compromised, when the economy declines, people might have to work for longer hours. If they work for longer hours, so the economy has declined, a thread's been pulled, they have to work for longer hours, the family is pulled along with that thread, and family responsibilities are pulled along with that thread. So the family can no longer fulfill its child care responsibilities in the same way. So the schools have to come in, and the schools, their thread is pulled too, because now schools have kids and might have to feed them at times that they're not normally used to feeding them, might have to take care of them after school so parents can work. Nonprofits might have to provide care. All of these other religious churches will provide daycare. All of these other institutions become impacted because the thread in the economy has been pulled. And some form of social integration is compromised in that way. Okay, so this is what he means by social cohesion being compromised. When that happens, he calls a state of normlessness can occur, anomie. And anomie is kind of like, well, it translates literally as rulelessness or normlessness. But if you watch The Walking Dead, or I'm following The Strain right now, I'm really into Guillermo del Toro and The Strain. These apocalyptic kind of tales are stories that deal with anomic situations, that something has happened, people don't know what the rules are anymore, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to act. They don't know what group they're a part of anymore. All those things become compromised. In The Strain, I don't know if anybody's watching The Strain out there, but the lead character is a CDC doctor, and he thinks he's fighting a disease. It actually this sounds crazy. I can't believe I'm explaining this, but it's not a disease. It's vampirism. Well, it is kind of a disease. You have to watch the show. But because he believes it's vampirism, he gets kicked out of the CDC, so he's no longer a part of that group. He doesn't know what to do with this because he's a doctor. The rules don't apply anymore. So there's this kind of confusion at the individual level. But then when we see this thing taking hold societally, there's mass confusion societally as well. The same thing, looting, even the newscasters on the news, on the TV show that again, the strain that I'm watching, are confused, they're rushed, they don't really know quite how to report what they're reporting. Things just stop making sense, and you'll call the police and the police can't respond. This is an anomic situation. Not just I'm individually feeling anomic, but societally a crisis occurs. In real life, we can think of Hurricane Katrina as being a good example of this. That social institutions failed and anomie occurred, and that people lost that cohesion. That social cohesion is now lost, and people don't really know what to do, and how to act, and what what is predictable in a given society. If we go back to this idea of social institutions as being interdependent, and that their interdependence and their connectivity is, and their success is required to keep society as being well integrated, to keep those behavioral norms intact. And this is actually an idea that comes from Parsons. Parsons introduced this to Durkheim's idea about social institutions and cohesion. When there's stress in one social institution, other institutions come in to fill in the gaps, and that's called functional equivalence. So if one institution becomes weak and can't fulfill its task anymore, then the others will kind of step up to bat. And that example that I gave about the economy weakens, families aren't able to make enough money, so they go back to work. The needs of the economy is stressed, families stressed, their functions are compromised, and other social institutions step up to the plate, churches, nonprofits, schools, to help fulfill the needs that are no longer able to be provided by the family. We could even argue that the criminal justice system steps up to fulfill a need. So maybe kids are left unmonitored. Kids might commit more crime. Therefore, the criminal justice system might step in to provide, quote unquote, a child care function. This is what it's an idea, again, from Durkheim, that social institutions, even if the purpose that they serve is bad, or if there are behaviors that are bad, they still serve a social purpose and they're necessary. So back to our criminal justice example, crime is bad, criminal behavior is bad, but we see it performing a necessary social function, and that it does help solidify our ideas of what norms of behavior are. It helps create social cohesion. It helps integrate us into community. If you think about what happened after 9/11, the event itself was horrific, but afterwards there was this intense recognition or national pride. National pride and solidarity came out of that. Durkheim would say that's a positive thing, right? That's necessary. That event served a positive function, a negative event, a positive impact. And that many crime is a perfect example of this, of behaviors and events that are bad but serve a social function that's really necessary. You would argue that family serves a function in society, that families, if there's no function to be served, they disappear. But families as an institution serve a particular function, therefore we need them. And that the family in particular would serve as a mechanism for social integration and, again, socialization, rule, norm, education. What else did Parsons pull from? He pulled from Weber, Max Weber. He was a German philosopher and an academic. He wrote shortly after Marx, so he was very well read. He again was a student of philosophy, and he is writing a little bit in contrast to Marx too, but not for the same reasons that maybe American sociologists didn't in the 50s. Weber just disagreed. He just felt like Marx relied too much on using the economy as explanations for how society works, and he believed that values and ideas mattered, and he tried to insert those back into some of the Marxist theories of how the world works and how it operates. So he studied religion, he studied the family, he studied the economy, he studied the academy, the intelligentsia. He studied organizations and bureaucracies, and he looked at how values influence these types of organizations and these things. How do these non-tangible things affect how the world works? Not just the economy, but how do values and ideas work together with economic situations to create reality? And I'll give you an example. One of his more famous books is called the Capitalism and the Protestant Ethic. I'm blanking on that too. My memory's horrible. But he looked at how Protestant theology influenced the development of capitalism in the United States and establishment of a strong capitalist society in the United States. Basically, he argued that early Protestant theologies in the colonies and then in the U.S. Were necessary to give capitalism a good foundation. And I'm simplifying this incredibly, but the idea that in early Protestantism that the individual is accountable to God alone, this emphasis on the individual, is an individual achievement and individual accountability before God, individual evidence of salvation, is all necessary when we think about what types of values are required for a capitalist system to work. One that emphasizes individual achievement, one that emphasizes hard work. All of those things were required. Now, if we contrast that with some other theologies, which might be more communal, Catholicism is an example of that. Salvation theologically, it can be argued as less about the individual and more about the church and its relationship to God rather than my relationship to God as an individual. Other naturalistic religions that maybe don't see God as some being to be pleased, but of an essence in the world. Those types of religions couldn't have fueled capitalism and couldn't have made it successful simply because the theology gave individuals drives that helped perpetuate the capitalist economy in the U.S. So that's an example of how he took values and tried to show how these values, theologies, ideas impacted social reality and relationships. He looked at the family, and again, these are just some examples of how his approach to the family, his ideas that affect or emotion impacted these necessary economic ties, that they actually legitimized these economic ties. If the family is an economic unit, it's only that unit because it's legitimized by emotion, or it's based on some form of emotional relationship, emotional attachment, or the value we might put to biological attachment. One of the interesting things he did bring up was this idea of a domestic authority being derived through traditional means. He talks about various forms of authority, and he lists three. The first would be traditional authority. It's always been done this way. It's historically, it's the historic path we've been committed to, or the way relationships have evolved historically. A priest might have authority within the church through traditional means because the church, or the pope, the church has a historical theological justification for that. It's a traditional means of authority. Fathers might have authority based on the way that things have always been done before. Not necessarily who that person is, but you're in a position of authority because historically that's the justification for the authority that you have. Two other ways one can garner authority. One would be through institutional means.
through the position that you hold, you have authority, the formal position you hold within a bureaucracy or an organization. An example of this might be a police officer. A police officer has authority because of the position within the organization. Should someone resign their position as a police officer, they can't pull anyone over on the highway and search the car for drugs or an open container or whatever. You can't do asset seizures if you're a former state trooper. You can only do those things if you're a current state trooper. You only have that authority because the position that you're in. If you're not in that position anymore, you no longer have that authority. The president is an example of someone who has institutional authority. Generals, etc. The third form of authority is called charismatic authority, and charismatic authority derives from simply the charisma of an individual, that someone can command authority because of their personality and their drive and their attractiveness, their charm, their skill. An example of someone who has charismatic authority, a lot of times we see these in religious organizations or new nonprofit organizations, develop out of someone's personality, personal convictions. Livestrong is a good example of that. Livestrong was a nonprofit that developed for cancer awareness and cancer fundraising out of Lance Armstrong's story of being a cancer survivor. It raised a lot of money, a lot of awareness. It was a very successful organization until Lance Armstrong's story was called into question and he was discredited. Charismatic authority is actually a very vulnerable type of authority because it's based on the reputation of that one individual. And in this instance, it was a perfect example of how charismatic authority has to be institutionalized at some point, or the organization can really suffer and die if you are based solely on charisma. So Livestrong has moved from a cancer awareness type organization. I mean, now I see their work online, and I have an app on my phone. It's more about health awareness, diet, exercise. You can download a calorie counter and an exercise tracker and all those things through Livestrong. They've really retooled what they are. Lance Armstrong very quickly left the board of directors, and they tried to disassociate themselves from him because the organization was getting its authority from Lance Armstrong's charismatic authority. And when he loses that authority, the organization also ran the risk of losing that authority. So charismatic authority is one of the more vulnerable types. Weber says the family, systems of authority within families are based on primarily traditional means. Okay, so what did Parsons take away from all this? A society is a system. There are differentiated roles between individuals and between social institutions in this system. There are shared values of individuals. We all are socialized in pretty much the same way. We all share pretty much the same values. We all like to see society kind of working in the same way. And that this society is in equilibrium. It's in balance, and it works. If there's a blip or there's a weakness, this functional equivalence takes over, and everything tries to work towards order and work towards becoming a stable, functioning system, a predictable system. Some of the functions that work within this system, we have manifest and latent functions. Manifest functions of institutions are those that are obvious and acknowledged. Latent functions are those that we don't necessarily see as expressed functions of that institution, but they're necessary functions that institution provides. I've given a list here of manifest and latent functions for the family. I think it's clearer when we look at manifest and latent functions for maybe the education system. The manifest function of the school system is to educate kids. The latent functions of the education system would be to teach children to obey authority, to teach children to obey rules, to teach children to sit at desks and be quiet. And my kids do sheets, tons and tons of sheet work. So, I often feel like one of the latent functions of the school system now is to teach them to be little paper pushers who can sit at a desk all day long, good white collar workers. Those would all be latent functions to produce individuals in society that have the expectations that are going to provide good workers. They're going to be good workers because they can obey the rules, follow authority, sit quietly, and do their work independently. All of those things might go towards fulfilling some latent functions that are required for the economic system or other social institutions. Okay, so according to structural functionalist views, everyone fits in society. Again, this puzzle has order. All the puzzle pieces fit together, and our families serve important functions and help keep this puzzle nice and neat and in equilibrium, and they help keep a stable society. Okay, next lecture we're going to look at some Marxist theories or conflict theories of the family.